Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. On this session of Writers Group Therapy, we have writer-director Ari Kelman, whose latest film, the elevated kidnapping thriller Barron's Cove, premiered recently at the Hampton International Film Festival. The script was a semifinalist for the Academy's Nicholl Fellowships and appeared on the Blacklist in 2021. Evan is also the CEO of ScriptGen, an AI company that creates tools for writers, designers, and producers to accelerate production and eliminate inefficiencies. Welcome to the show, Evan.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. And again, thanks for having me on.
We are so excited to talk to you, and we have a lot to talk with you about, it sounds like. But first, let's start at the beginning. How did you get started in filmmaking?
So I was lucky enough to go to a middle school and a high school that had some film and TV capabilities. There was like a weekly news program that, the kids could conduct interviews for and kind of do different stories on. And that was a really easy place to kind of, get our hands on a camera and, see if we had an affinity for it. That's where I really started getting into the behind the scenes type of thing. But, I really have to credit my parents because I grew up in a house that had a deep appreciation for the arts. And I spent a lot of my childhood going to shows and seeing movies and seeing plays. My parents actually they participated in a couple of Broadway shows, in a very small way, but it allowed me to go to these events and kind of meet with producers and kind of, feel like I was at least getting a very, very distant glimpse into the world of professional creative work. And I liked what I saw and I wanted to be part of it. So that was kind of the pathway. And then, yeah, through my school, I was able to kind of actually put my hands on a camera and start filming. And then from there, it's inviting your friends over on the weekends and doing a bad, impersonation of Goodfellas and terrible action movie cliches with rubber band guns and that kind of thing. And editing it, on the most basic software you can find. And you go from there. In high school, I went to New York Film Academy as kind of like a test to myself. Like, is this something I really want to dedicate my life to and pursue? And I had the best time. I didn't want it to end. I felt really confident in what I was making there, and I decided to keep going. It made me, feel very complete in a way, telling stories. It's just something that I love to do.
It sounds like the producing, directing came first and then the writing, or was it all kind of at the same time?
Yeah, well, you know what? I actually missed kind of an important chapter. So my first kind of foray into it was as an actor. I was like a child actor, totally unsuccessful child actor. I think my claim to fame is that I did a TV commercial with Rosie O'Donnell for Kmart or something like that. And, just a couple national TV commercials and that kind of thing. I really wanted to act. But as I got older, I realized that being behind the camera and writing and telling stories was, something that I think felt a little bit more natural to me. And, on a personal note, I don't know how heavy you want to get early on in the podcast, but I think it's really not heavy. It's honestly something that still inspires me. But unfortunately, my father passed away when I was pretty young. I was 11 years old when my father died. And, that's kind of a confusing age to lose a parent. And given, my background in acting and sort of making films with my friends, I sort of spent a lot of time watching movies, and I was able to sort of experience, a wide range of emotions and sort of connect with people going through all kinds of different challenges, through watching movies, all night. And all of those pathways sort of converged into a space where I said, this is where I feel fulfilled. I understand the value of storytelling. I know what I want to bring to it. And it just kind of grew from there.
And did Barron's Cove came out of that experience, I assume? And How early on did you decide you wanted to write that story? Because if you haven't seen Barron's Cove, and I hope you will at some point because it's fantastic, it does deal with a father and son relationship, and there's life and death consequences in the story. How did that story come out of your experience, and when did you write Barron's Cove?
So a lot of my movies have to do with, um, family relationships, whether it's brothers or parents. Um, and I kind of like to take those types of relationships and kind of put them on a stage with life and death stakes, because that's a really, rich canvas to kind of test these relationships. My NYU thesis film was a short film called Bandito, which I wrote and directed my junior year of undergrad, and it premiered at Tribeca. And that was a movie that had to do with brothers, in a really intense kind of life or death, you know, um, heist type of highway robbery heist type of situation. Right after that, I did a short film called Where There's Smoke, which is about a firefighter working to come back to work after being in an accident. And it's sort of this, psychological character piece where the character is struggling with his own mental health and the responsibility to his brothers who weren't able to come back to work after being in that same accident. So, moving from stories about brothers and kind of these, you know, family types of relationships into fathers and sons was really natural for me. But there was also a kind of a pragmatic approach to how this whole came about. I graduated from NYU in film. I had made a couple of very successful short films, but short films, they aren't going to get you hired on movies with a budget, or movies with that give you kind of the runway to tell the types of stories that you want to tell. Shorts are great, but they're by their very nature limiting, which is great for creative, but you want to expand. Um, so for me, I was like, okay, what is the feature film that I can write that will, has a high likelihood of being produced? And you have to sort of pay attention to the market a little bit. And in around, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, I started writing Barron's Cove, which is, this crime thriller that I knew had commercial appeal. Um, it was inspired by true events that actually happened. So a really tragic story that happened in England many years ago, where these young kids actually lured another kid to train tracks, and there was a murder that happened. And I read about that story, and for me, I'm always asking, um, what would happen if it went differently. I'm always looking at true stories and kind of wondering, what would have how would this have gone if XYZ. And so, in real life, they caught the kids that were responsible for that murder, and it ended a certain way. And I started to ask myself, what would happen if there was a cover up here? And what would happen if you had a father who wasn't able to get the answers that he wanted? And from there, the story started developing it. But yeah, it was about 5 years ago, maybe not five, more like 4 years ago, that I really started writing this. And if you want to talk a little bit about the business of writing, Barron's Cove is my second feature. My first feature is actually an adaptation of my father's autobiography, because my dad had a very interesting life and he wrote a really compelling book, and I adapted that into a feature screenplay. But what I learned, which is pretty obvious in retrospect, is nobody wants to, finance a first-time feature director's period biopic about somebody most people have never heard about. You know what I mean? So
Right. Mm-hmm.
um, I had to switch into something more commercial. That was a very long-winded answer to a really great question.
It
Hopefully,
was a good backstory though.
okay, good.
I was just gonna say, based on the timing, 4 years ago, you probably had a lot of time to write. Because I'm looking at your bio, and you've been keeping quite busy, and then there's a little gap, but I think we know what might have happened in that gap. A little worldwide shutdown.
Yeah, you know what? Exactly. Really, I was able to finish Barron's Cove during the COVID shutdown. I had been trying my hand at it for a while before COVID happened, but writing a movie, it's, at least for me, it's an all-encompassing process, and it was going very, very slowly. and it kind of required a global shutdown for me to have nowhere else to be. You have no excuses at that point. I was stuck in my house. I said, "This is the time," and I was able to write most of it and finish the first draft during COVID.
Since you write about such personal topics, I mean, I know it's a bit cathartic to like write about what you know, especially something so personal, but does it also, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, and like you adapted your dad's memoir, like how do you separate, as you sort through those emotions, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, that's a really great question. You just have to be deliberate about it. When I was adapting the book into a movie, the book is really long, and it there's a lot going on in it. And as a filmmaker, what often happens in adaptations is you combine events and you combine characters, um, and you have to sort of trust yourself to adhere to the spirit of the story. But also, in a feature film, your character can't start out. Your character has to start in a place of insufficiency in one way or another, right? So they have somewhere to go. So the character in the movie I wrote about my dad isn't probably how my dad would have maybe liked to be thought of at all times. It is a movie character, and you do need that opportunity for growth. But you just have to be aware that you're staying true to the spirit of something important, and you know kind of trust that. I think you have to let go all of the personal truths, and sort of be a little bit what's the word I'm looking for, just disciplined in that way, if that makes sense.
Mm. Hmm. Before we go into ScriptGen, because I can't wait to get to that, I do want to ask you about the film itself. How do you write a film where all the characters are kind of bad?
Yeah, oh, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved it. That was my favorite part. My favorite parts of writing this movie were writing like the like we have a politician character in this film who is just a really nasty guy, to say the least, and thinks he's better than everybody, and kind of sort of this viper character. One of my favorite characters of all time was the antagonist in Hunchback of Notre Dame, Lord Froyo, I think was his name, Lord something like that.
Oh, he's
you
such a
know
good villain.
he's
Yeah.
such a good villain. I love villains, because you can just totally unleash. Um, and so I guess the short answer to your question is, how do you do it? With a big smile on your face, and with standing up and pacing around your room, and unleashing your inner Disney villain with whatever diatribe is kind of coming to top of mind. It's a great time. But I also love these complex morality tales that are exploring the gray area between good and evil. I mean, that's where
Hmm.
the interesting questions are. So
Yeah,
um,
I was really
yeah,
amazed as you get into the story how all the characters go through a change from, they're what they're trying to be on the outside, and then they're what they are on the inside. And sometimes they let one show versus the other.
yeah, exactly. Which I think speaks to something that all of us do in our own way. Obviously, this is a movie, so it's heightened and it's dramatized, but all of us have those parts of our character that we're proud of and parts that we're still working on, and how they show themselves and what brings them out. That's part of our journey. That's also, I think, why we love movies, is because we're going on that cathartic experience with these characters who are undergoing some change in the context of a story where there's all the loose ends are being tied up more or less, which is something we don't always get in our real lives. But we live for those journeys, for those resolutions, for those changes. That was really important for me with this film. I really wanted to take a character and go through an incredible journey. And I don't want to get into spoilers necessarily, but our main character, Caleb, he goes on this unbelievable journey, um, starting in a place of, anger and rage and hatred, and kind of ending in a place of forgiveness and self-sacrifice under really intense circumstances. And I wanted to create a narrative that believably chartered that path, because those are the stories that inspire me, when you have characters that go through these massive changes to become their best selves, if it's possible, even if just for a moment. So I don't know if that answers that question.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's cool. So let's switch gears now. You are the CEO of ScriptGen, and I checked out the website and the tools and stuff that you have online. And I gotta say, I'm totally fascinated because if you listen to any of our episodes that aren't an interview with a filmmaker, they're almost all touch on AI these days. So,
Yeah.
so how did your early filmmaking and writing experience lead you to found ScriptGen?
So that's a great question. Barron's Cove took me um, a couple of years to write, and then it took me a couple of years to produce. I mean, the process from putting out the first offer to an actor, or finding the producer, or finding all of these different crew matches, whatever it was. It's a really complicated, uh, difficult, time-consuming process. And with the advent of AI, it just became very clear to me that it doesn't have to be as miserable as it is, and it doesn't need to take years, to put a movie together and get people to set. So for me, the question I'm asking at my company is, how do we use AI to get people to set faster? And I know there's a lot of hesitation as it relates to AI, and I have my own hesitations as it relates to some AI. But AI is kind of like a tool that you can use for good or not. And we like to think we're using AI to empower people in our industry and make them competitive, because you do have software that's coming out right now that is a total replacement um, for our industry. And I mean, that's upsetting and shocking to say and to think about, but you have, total video generation, right? Where you don't need actors, and you
Hmm.
don't need agents, and you don't need a DP. That's like a nightmare to me. I hate that. I hate the thought of that. So the
Yeah,
question
Hollywood's a people business too. It's
yeah,
so odd for it to be, you know, if you imagine a movie being made totally by AI, it's like there's no humanity in it.
no humanity in it. And today they're very limited by that, and there's a very small audience for that. And I should say, I have friends that are exploring total AI replacement video generation, and they're pushing the boundaries, and I'm impressed by what they're able to do with the technology, because you can't deny it. But in a couple of years, it may get better. And my biggest concern is less days on set, and less shoots happening for crew people. My The goal at my company is to empower agents, writers, directors, producers, to bring projects to set faster, so that we are a competitive industry, as opposed to just a total replacement, which is my greatest concern.
Can you give us a quick rundown of what your tools are and what they can do for those people you were just talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. The way that our business is set up today is, we've broken down ScriptGen into three distinct domains of work that we have identified with, like a name and a face, and they're sort of domain experts. So we have Walter, the writing assistant, we have Debbie, the designer assistant, and we have Piero, the producing assistant. And basically, these three characters represent the three different spheres of work that go into getting a movie off the ground. So our writing assistant, you can upload your script to our writing assistant and speak with Walter. What's it? What are some ideas for this character's home life, or what is a memory this character might have with with their mother, or with their significant other. And with Walter, you can kind of get deeper into your own material. It's kind of like having a creative collaborator, which is really, really hard to find. I mean, I struggled for a long time finding someone that I could talk to about my script. And so Walter is sort of supposed to be, the co-writer you always wanted, and the mentor that you never had, somebody to kind of bounce your script off of, and help you deepen it and get it to the next level. Um, we have Debbie, which represents the design tools. So if you upload your script, you can generate concept art, character art for inspiration, or for a pitch deck, or for a reference on set. That's something that we're working on. But I think our main focus today, just given the state of the industry, and given um, what we think are our priorities, we're focused mostly on building tools for executives, for producers, for managers, So probably our most popular tool today is a coverage tool. So in ScriptGen, if you upload a screenplay, you can get a full coverage report in just 2 minutes. And this is something that we've refined over the past year of working with some of the best agents and managers in the business. They've told us exactly what they need out of a coverage report. And in 2 minutes, you get a coverage report that has a log line, a synopsis, character information for all the main characters, all the supporting characters, the scene counts, the dialogue counts for those characters. You get a marketability summary. What are the comps? What other movies is it like? What's the budget range? And then a very, high level creative note section. Is a certain part of, is there a certain part that spends too much time in one place or another? I really like to leave the creative in the hands of the human being, of course, but it can help, with it, with a manager or an agent kind of saying, yeah, I do agree with that, or I don't agree with that. And again, it helps scripts kind of cut through the noise. And an agent might take 2 or 3 weeks to read a script traditionally or get coverage on it. Here they are getting coverage in 2 minutes, and they can very easily say, okay, I know the perfect person for this, let me send this out. I am looking for something like this, or I'm not looking for something like this. The whole point is, how do we speed up the process of getting to set? That's the main question that we're trying to answer, in as ethical a way as possible, as the technology is
Mm-hmm.
developing.
Do you see this as a competitor or an alternative to something like the Blacklist?
Um, not really. No, the blacklist is, kind of a two-parter. You have the blacklist website where you can upload your script, and you'll get coverage, from a human being, and you can pay a monthly fee for the script to
Mm-hmm.
be hosted, and producers are able to search for your script. It's kind of like a script marketplace. Um, at one level. And then you have obviously the yearly blacklist, which is voted on by all the industry executives, and that's kind of a separate thing. But we are not a script marketplace. If you upload a script to ScriptGen, it is 100% confidential, which is a promise that we have to make to our clients, who are agents and managers and producers that are uploading scripts for franchises and major studios. It has to be, the security is paramount. So we're different in that way.
Do you think with the coverage and the when you're uploading your script to do coverage, is it just using its knowledge to evaluate your script, or is it using other scripts to compare to your script? Do you know what I'm saying? Like the training data, where is that coming from?
Yeah, so that I don't have my CTO on this call. This is generally, when I have these types of meetings, I turn it over to my CTO because he's able to brilliantly articulate this. But
Ah,
essentially, he's designed these models that are connected to other models. He likes to say there's hundreds of pathways between all these models that are working together to deliver a very specific result, depending on kind of which part of our website, which part of our tool you're working with. Um, but we try to keep it all about the facts, right? So our coverage report, it isn't creatively, it isn't working hard to creatively compare your script to other scripts, even though we do have a very very small creative section. It's really about the facts, right? Here are the plot points of this script, so that an agent can say this is relevant to my client or it's not. Or here is the factual data about the characters in this script. They were born here, this is their ethnicity, this is their backstory, right? It's just taking all of the factual information from a screenplay and presenting it in a very digestible format.
cool. And that makes sense. I actually just had another writing group I work with testing out an AI coverage tool. And I literally sent off one of my scripts that I'm finishing up. I've been working with a story editor to polish it. So I'm interested to see what it says versus what he says. And then I got it back like right away. It felt a little generic, and it felt like it regurgitated stuff, but it didn't really understand things as well as it could have. So I feel like it sounds like yours is a little more comprehensive. It's and it as far as like, I guess you can answer this question: does it actually give recommendations? Is it going that far in a coverage where it's doing the recommend, consider, or that kind of thing?
No, we don't do recommend or consider. We just, our priority is giving the facts and letting the human being make the determination, is this a fit
Okay.
for my clients or my production company. It'll give the comps, and a producer can say, yeah, I do want to make movies in aligned with this, or I don't. But we have been told that our coverage is pretty good. We have enterprise clients that have switched from other. There are other AI coverage services out there. Um, our clients have switched from some of those services to our service, and we've been told that ours is the best, and we're really proud of that. It comes from hard work and deep collaboration with agents, producers, and managers. Reviewing our coverage, giving feedback, comparing it against other coverage that they already have, and so we're really confident in what we're offering.
Cool. And can people try your services out? Is there a trial, or is it, I don't know what
Yeah,
your model is on the business side.
for sure. If you go to scriptgen.com, you can sign up for an account. I think we have a promotion going on right now where it's like I think it's a month free, which comes with a certain amount of coverages, and then you can purchase more if you want. But yeah, you could go to the website right now, run a script through ScriptGen, and see what the coverage is. So you can do it for your own project. You can upload your script and talk to Walter about your script. Or if you're a rep and you have a lot of scripts in your inbox, which is usually the type of client we're working with, you can get a report, so you can very quickly say this is a match for me or it isn't.
Cool. Did you run Barron's Cove through ScriptGen as well?
Yeah, I have actually, because just as kind of like a demo, and when I'm showing it to people, if you go to our website, and you can see some of the gifs and whatnot that we have. I'm using my own material because I don't want to,
Yeah. Roshni
publish
noticed
it.
that.
Yeah, but ScriptGen only existed after Barron's Cove, um, so I wish I had it, right?
You can kind of like see what it does now and compare it to, did it live up to what you expected it to be, I guess.
Right, right. And making Barron's Cove was just it took so long. It took so long. My ex girlfriend liked to joke that the movie was the third person in our relationship.
Oh, wow.
You know,
How long do you estimate using ScriptGen would have saved on your production, or on an average production?
yeah. Well, it took me well over a year to get an outline down that I felt confident in. You can use ScriptGen to do a really rough draft of a first pass of an outline, so you can kind of start to see, um, how would this story develop, even if it's not perfect, right? We're not promising like the end result. That's not our goal. Our goal is to help writers along their process a little bit faster. If you just rely on ScriptGen or you just rely on any AI, you're not going to get a good result. But you can use AI to help speed along your internal process, whether it's a co-writer that you're speaking to, or just how do I combine all these different ideas that I have, and this is working, some, or it's not working, right? If you see something that's not working, that's really informative. you know
Hmm.
you can spend years on an idea that is never going to work. With ScriptGen, you can kind of quickly see, yeah, it's not going to add up. This is not a feature idea. Maybe it's a TV show. So that's the kind of time that we can save.
That's really cool. I'm chuckling over here because Tom was so excited to talk to you about the AI part of this whole conversation.
I'm
So
definitely going to be using it. I'm going to give it a try. So,
Yeah, please
that's
do.
so awesome. So what is next? Oh,
oh, I'm sorry. I have so many scripts that I started that I stopped because I wasn't sure what to do next. So I feel like it's the perfect test model to see if it can help me get over that hump, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's great for that. And there's so much that we want to do that we haven't built yet, but we want to build soon. So um, right now, I can't say we're able to do A through Z, which is ultimately where we want to go, but we can do a little bit of A, and we can do a little bit of D, and we can do a little bit of G, and we're really responding to the market and what the industry is telling us that they want out of AI.
very cool. So what is next for Barron's Cove and what is next for you?
So yeah, Barrett's Cove is world premiering at the Hamptons Film Festival this coming Sunday. I think by the time this podcast is released, it will have just happened. So that's kind of, you know, Barron's Cove kind of coming out into the world. From there, it might play at a couple other festivals. We are working on distribution right now. Once there's a distributor, then it really hits the masses, and we'll see what the reaction is. I couldn't be more excited to get it out there. What's next for me is writing my next film. I've already put together an outline for my next film, something I'm really excited about, something I've also been working on for a couple of years, and putting together that film, looking for more films, looking for available scripts that are out there that are a fit for my type of storytelling, and then growing the business. We speak to producers, managers, agents every day, and we get a lot of ideas. Hey, can ScriptGen do this? Can ScriptGen do this? And building that out to meet those demands. That's really important to me. So those are kinds of that's really the two sides of my life. I have the narrative filmmaking career. I have the startup, which is thankfully gathering steam, and I also do TV commercials. So between those three things, I'm luckily pretty busy.
That's awesome. And if people want to find you, how can they do so?
Yeah, if people want to find me, you can find me on Instagram is a really good place. My account there is Ev Kelm. That's EVKELM. Feel free to follow me. I post a lot of behind the scenes information about what I'm working on, or BTS photos, and feel free to DM me and have a chat. I'm always around.
Oh, that's really cool. So awesome. Everybody make sure you check out Barron's Cove if it's at a film festival near you, and I'm sure it'll be in theaters eventually. And make sure you check them out online. You can check us out at WG Therapy on Instagram and X, and writersgrouptherapy.com, and we will see you in a few weeks.